What is up, my champions of code out there? We're taking a look at a little slice of life, little old school slice of life with jQuery Ajax and building out a simple CRUD style CRUD web app using, again, jQuery Ajax. It's part of our course, and I figured might serve as a good template and starting off point for anyone that is curious. In the description of this video, there will be a GitHub link to this repository. It's got the basics of an Express server set up. I did some of this off camera, some on, and it wasn't very YouTube friendly, so I left that off for now, but it has the basics of what I wrote and why I wrote it in that server side code, and it's actually very, very simple stuff. But the reason I made this video is I had a lot of students wondering and stuck on how they build the front end out after they get the Express API part running. Seems that most individuals end up understanding all this stuff quite all right, but then end up struggling connecting it to a front end. And how a bunch of tests I made in Postman as part of our course, and how they correspond to, well, the website itself. So let's start diving in and check it out. At the moment, I have no client-side or front-end code whatsoever. A very common approach is, well, we can name the folder anything we want. For example, pizza, for those that have been following my content before. Or, for example, we can make it a folder called public or client, or it doesn't really matter. I just realized I put that in the server folder. That didn't need to be there. There we go. I'm going to move it out to the root of my project. I'm going to go ahead and start it up with 3 simple files. An index.html, where I'll use an Emmet shortcut to build a quick little scaffolded HTML page. I'm going to go ahead and link into this a style sheet in case I need it. And in the bottom of my document body, I'm going to go ahead and script source an app.js as well. So I'm going to go ahead and make those files, because I kind of need them if I'm going to be linking them and sourcing them. Okay, let's do something obvious, like on the, not the body class, on the body, let's just change it to an arbitrary background color to something very, very obvious so we know our style sheet is linked. And in my JavaScript file, I'm going to go ahead and give myself some kind of simple console log. That way, again, I know everything is scaffolded and wired up correctly, so when I begin building it out, I don't got to worry about that tidbit if I've gone 30 steps and I forgot to check the first step. So there we go, something simple to go ahead and get going with here. And in previous labs in this course, you would simply open the index.html in your default browser, but we can't do that now. It needs to be served as a static asset from our server. And, think of static assets as, well, things that aren't going to be changing once they're sent out. We're going to write some code that may manipulate the DOM, but it's not going to be rewriting HTML and the entire file or something like that, or pictures. This file is not going to be constantly evolving and changing once it gets sent to the browser, and same thing for our code. It executes and manipulates and does stuff in memory, but it's not going to be changing or adding console logs or magically writing new lines of code that weren't there before. And hence, that's why I like to think of them as static in that regard. There's other references to how they're, the file paths are referenced in networks and whatnot, but just think of them as, static things. They're not going to be changing. We just send them and it should do their job just fine. Hence why I'm going to think of them in that regard as static files. So in our server.js now, we need to code our server, which, at the point of the starting point of this video and that repo, doesn't quite yet have that bit of code added to it. So I'm going to go ahead and include it, maybe above my API router, definitely below, my Morgan middleware here that logs all those incoming requests. We're going to do an app.use, so my whole application uses this without any specific path. So before API router here is important. And we're going to simply say use the express.static middleware to do so. And this middleware in the past would require a path.join with an underscore dir name and all that kind of fun stuff. But these days you can actually get away with this shorthand here, which ultimately will generate that correct path.join, where we can tell it to simply look in the root of our project for the name of the folder we are attempting to serve as our static assets, our public folder right there. It'll automatically know how to go and look for that. So when I end up running this project here with an npm run dev, which is in the readme of the repo, how to run this project and how to install it and stuff like that. Here we go. I can go to the browser, open a new tab, go to localhost 3000, and the big, beautiful blue Covalence color, hashtag 0091EA is definitely kicking. The HTML is good to go. The style sheet is attached, and our JavaScript is there and rocking as well. I have a pretty good starting point for getting this sucker up and running. This is not going to be pretty. I can spend hours on UI UX and never end up happy. So we're going to focus heavily on functionality and not so much on style. But if there is interest, I don't mind taking the time to have an additional video after this that deals with the styling, because I don't want to do it during the video, because that'd just be awful. Terrible, as a matter of fact. So, okay. Let's get rid of that at the very least. Yes, save the file. All right. We're actually done on our server, so I'm going to close and collapse that. Me personally, I always like collapsing if I'm in this style repository that has the front and back end coupled together in one project where, you know, the server sends the front end. If I'm done working in my server, I recommend newbies to close out those editing windows and collapse that server folder, because now you're thinking front end and you shouldn't be importing things to your server, to your website, and vice versa, because that ain't going to work, and we don't want to do that. They are two separate realms of existence. Two sets of console logs we got to debug from now, one here in our server and one here in the browser. So when you get server-side errors, clearly you head to your server console. If you get website problems, you head here. But the website problem might be a server-side error, like a server-side 401, which means unauthorized, 500, internal server error, 404, path not found, or I think it's 412, which is I'm a teapot. Pretty sure that's a thing. Precondition failed. I was wrong. I was robbed. Now that's 451, which is a Fahrenheit 451 reference, unavailable for legal reasons. What was the I'm a teapot status code? 418! I was 6 off. Yeah, so 418, I'm a teapot is a fun little Easter egg joke from way back in the day. I always tell my students, throw it in somewhere random to surprise me if I'm looking at your lab, and I'm like, I'm a teapot? What kind of server response? Oh, they're messing with me. I got it now. Anyway, if you see those logs here, sometimes you still have to go backtrace them over to your server-side console logs to see what actually failed. Okay then, so we need to probably have jQuery, considering that has been the discussion and the advanced part of this particular lab and demonstration that's, you know, the reference material for that advanced part of the lab. So we're going to type in jQuery cheat sheet, evidently, which I do that all the time. I like looking up cheat sheets, so I have a high-level overview of everything a library or framework has at its disposal. Even if I don't know what more than 2/3 of things may or may not do, I have an overview of some terms I can always start looking up if I start getting lost or confused. I'm like, surely there's something here that can help me. Oh, this looks important. What does that do? And we might go and, you know, have something we can start Googling on Reddit and Stack Overflow and things like that. Like I said, this gives you a jumping off point for negotiations. All right, but we actually need jQuery linked here. I'm going to go and look up the jQuery CDN. I'm going to grab the latest 3x release, which if y'all didn't know this, I think a 4.0 is coming out in the horizon. I know a new 3x version came out recently. Anyway, you might have remembered in old school Bootstrap, jQuery was part of it, and it actually used a particular version called Slim Minified. Slim meant it actually did not have all of jQuery's features. In particular, the Ajax features are not in the Slim build. So if you're using jQuery, make sure it's not the Slim version, because we want the full version just minified for efficiency. So I'm going to copy the script and paste it above my app.js. There we go. I'm going to use a quick test here to be like, yo, jQuery, could you find all h1 elements in my current document? And let's go ahead and change their inner text to say, wow, it worked. And that way I, again, know that I successfully linked jQuery to my project. Now remember, this was a client-side code change, so I don't have to restart my server. I simply have to refresh the browser. It asks for those static assets. It sends the HTML, the app.js, and I know it did its job as expected. Heck yeah, that's what I'm talking about. All right. Now we're getting into the fun parts. So we have an endpoint that does indeed retrieve all of our to-do items. I changed the contents of those to-do items from my video and in the repo to actually make a bit more sense than testing a title content and testing another title content to record a server-side video and record a client-side video. I'm making the arbitrary designation that my to-do items will be as simple as a title and a content of what to do. And, you know, in future features, this is like a good starting off point to build a full-featured project. Go add in completions, if it's completed or not, completion dates, creation dates, editing dates, and things like that. That's what I like about these CRUD-style applications, is at their core, they're pretty simple when you understand how to build them, and then from there, they are this excellent springboard of just stocking your portfolio with all these cool projects, because there's always so many new features you can keep thinking of and adding. They're like time vampires. They suck out all the time I have at my hands, because I'm always going, ooh, I want a search bar, ooh, I want to do this, ooh, I want to do that, and before I know it, I have yet another unfinished project in my repository. But Here, though, we're going to focus on some of the basics because this is the advanced part that some students are having some trouble with. So I have this endpoint here that can retrieve this list of to-do items, or chirps if you're doing the lab. Woohoo! How do I incorporate that to the front end? So jQuery has what we used to use in network requests called Ajax, which I forgot what they meant, even though I had to look it up for my React video series where I talked about it at that point in time, so yay for me. Remember, I told y'all, even though I've been developing for years, I still have to Google the most basic things on a daily basis. I probably could have guessed my way through that and got it. Asynchronous JavaScript and XML. It has a series of functions that were pretty much the standard use before fetch was built into browsers. And that's actually what we ended up using inside of our React module, where we talked about fetching and making requests to APIs to retrieve or get hint method informations, right? So you could use fetch for this whole thing, but let's go ahead and practice what everyone wants to do, which is, well, jQuery Ajax. There are some shorthand methods here, but we're going to just use the raw Ajax function instead, because it'll help you understand a bit more of where fetch came from over time and how it also works. So kind of like figuring out how it works in the basics of Ajax can help you figure out more down the line as well, which is why I like not using those shorthands, just doing it all longhand like this. It is a function that takes what we can define as an options object, something like that, a set of curly braces. In these curly braces, and you might be wondering, but Luke, how do you know all this? It's because I had to Google it at one point in time already. So if I do jQuery.ajax, I had to go look at the API documentation, realize I don't like reading the jQuery API documentation, finding W3 schools instead, and trying to figure out what it does from there and getting examples and things like that. But basically, each of these Postman tabs get all to-do items, get one, add one, edit one by an ID, delete one by an ID. I want to recreate pretty much all those requests as some kind of Ajax feature on my front end here. So in the case of Ajax, we need to provide what type of request is this. This is called method in fetch land. In Ajax, it's called type. It is a get request. Man, Discord is popping off, and I should have closed it out to make sure it wasn't going to be interrupting the video. In the background, it is going off. Okay. Next, we need to type in the URL, which will be the first argument in... Now it's closed. This is popping off as soon as I start recording. I'm leaving that in. Okay, so URL, that's what the first argument is in a fetch. If y'all recall, it is whatever the URL of the string value of whatever endpoint you're trying to hit. And you might be thinking, well, okay, it'll be http://localhost:3000 /API /to-dos, just like we did in the server-side video. Well, in this case, we actually don't have to write all this information because, well, this website is coming from our server itself, so it will presume that this is the base URL or root URL for us anyhow. So I can simply shorthand it down to the relative API to-dos, and it will automatically assume that will come with the territory of localhost:3000. That's very convenient. So what I need to do now is there's a callback function feature of Ajax, which, I believe is completed or something like that. I don't like that syntax, and matter of fact, do we have to convert this to a promise? No, it's already coded to act as a JavaScript promise. So then, whenever that request resolves from the server, it should send us this as the response. So I might call that my to-do items or something like that. It's a variable. I can make up whatever name I want. Oh, it's a function argument, but we can make it up whatever name we want. And I'm simply going to grab that information from the function argument in my .then resolver function, and then simply log the value to see what happens. Let's check it out. And voila, I have my data on the website. And it's as simple as that. This is the same kind of GET request stuff we were doing in the JSON placeholder demonstrations and the Studio Ghibli APIs. We just had to take one extra step and code the API ourselves instead of just making requests to it. Well, if I have that, all I need to do is, well, not an array map because we're not having to return items, but I could loop through this object. And you'll notice here it's not an array, which is really annoying, but there's ways to loop through arrays or loop through objects. We could do one of the following. Let's check it out. It's called a for in loop. I can say const key, or we can call it ID or key, whatever we want really, in the to-do items object. Let's console log ID first off real quick here and see what that does for us. 01 and next ID. This, I don't think I'm going to be rendering what that is to the DOM, so we can actually ignore that one. So I can even say, if ID is that next ID key, then just do nothing. We don't want to really do anything. We don't care. Just stop this function in its tracks so we don't console log anything. because we don't have to display anything with that key of next ID. But okay, you might be wondering, how do those two numbers in that object help us? And let me go ahead and relog to do items outside of the loop, the for in loop, so you can see what we're trying to reference here. Those two numbers, 0 and 1, represent the keys of the two objects I want to get the data out of. So to do that in this syntax, it looks kind of like an array. I reference my object, and we simply wrap it in a set of square brackets, which if you didn't know is a valid way of accessing values in an object. Y'all might be used to something like person.name, that dot notation right there to access the property of an object. But it can also work in this syntax here. I can simply write the following to achieve the exact same thing, to access the person object at key or property position, name, and whatever its value is. So in this case with this console log, it should log each individual object. And those objects have a property of .title, if I want to show that, or .content. And how convenient is that, knowing that for in loop trick right there? Awesome. Well, if I have the titles happening there, why don't we just ask jQuery? I'm digging my ear in the video again, super professional. And you know, we could leave the console log there. We can just be like, yo, jQuery, let's do some stuff. To the body of the document, let's append. I'm gonna do a template literal so I can do multiple lines of HTML because I'm a masochist like that. I want to append a quick div. This is why JSX was invented, because writing tons of HTML inside of one string can get very hairy very fast. So your mileage may vary with this idea, but I think it's fun to point out that this is like pre-JSX, if you will. And we're going to have another div here that'll act as the title of this particular element. We can style this up later. Again, that's not the focus of this one. And this div will act as the div container for the content. So $ curly braces, remember, that's for newbies out there. That's not $ jQuery. This is $ template literals, the backticks to interpolate these values. So here I might choose to do items, square bracket ID for that position, .title for this one. I'm going to copy and paste for simplicity. Down here in content for this div. Maybe I can change this to a bigger paragraph or header. Maybe this will be a paragraph element instead of a div. Honestly, it don't matter all too much. Probably make them into like an node list of list items and things like that. Again, style is not the purview or the focus of this particular one. It's more of how do we get this working. And there you go. I have successfully added or made a GET request to my own server that displayed the title and the contents of said thing. And we can get fancy here. Hold on. Oh, this is the classic Luke. I'm not going to worry about style. Proceeds to worrying about style. There we go. Just for some kind of breakup in the DOM there. There you go. I got the title and the contents displaying. Ain't none but a thing. Nothing to it. Okay then. Well, that part was easy. What's next? How about we add a form to add new items with? Let's do it. So first things first, I could write all that for my app.js, but I ain't going to do that because that's a lot of unnecessary work. Maybe in past labs I'd ask you to do that for practice, but these days your vanilla JavaScripts are probably up to par, at the very least, if not higher than that. So how about instead we go make a form out here in the document body instead. We're not going to be using the form action method properties as I want it controlled entirely from my JavaScript, and that's it. So in this form, let's produce two inputs. An input, we're going to give it an ID to select with jQuery to make our lives easy. We're going to call this the title input. And let's do a text area as well. I should probably give it all these values, but We'll see how big that is. And an ID of this one, maybe we'll call it content, considering that's what my rec.body is expecting. I don't have to match these things, but I'm going to be consistent and just ID them with easy things that I can remember. Title and content, because this is the exact same properties I'm expecting in my objects anyway. Okay then, so it should look pretty bad. It's okay. Like I said, the style here is not important because inputs are inline. And if I had Bootstrap, I can just throw on some class names to make it pretty decent looking. But for now, again, I said we're focusing on functionality as the core thing here. Distill it down to the basics, because whatever style you choose to do, raw CSS, Bootstrap, Bulma, Material, Chakra UI, Tailwind, my personal favorite, doesn't matter. I want to focus on the functionality first and foremost. So on a button element, we'll call it add to do item, and we're going to give it a click listener at some point, but for now, let's just give it a quick little add to do ID right there, so I have something I can find it by with jQuery. Okay, cool. Remember that submitting a form in the browser here has a default behavior of refreshing the page or submitting the form. We're actually going to control it entirely from our JavaScript and not have to rely on the default attributes of form action and form method. So over here in my JavaScript, I'm going to collapse this get request and its .then function like that, just so it's out of my way. So that's the first thing that happens when the page loads. So how about now I say, hey jQuery, find that add to do. I like how I wrote it literally like a nanosecond ago. I wrote it figuratively a nanosecond ago and forgot what it is. So hashtag add to do, give it a click listener that runs the following function. We're going to prevent default console log test. If the console log stays, that means we prevented the form from submitting the page and breaking our JavaScript logic, and instead allows it to stay there. Next thing I want to do is capture the title and the content and maybe cram them into an object and log that object. So I'm going to be like, yo, jQuery, let's go ahead and make a variable here. We're going to be like, yo, jQuery, const title equals, hey jQuery, please find that hashtag title input and grab its value for me, and do the same thing down here for the content text area. What I'd like to do then is simply console log an inline object that has title : title with ES6. We can just do title, and the same thing for content. You'll notice I take this shorthand trick a lot. If the key and the value are the same name, we can shorthand it down to the singular. I'm also going to go ahead and run the title and content value grabbers from jQuery, and we're going to empty out their values to make it look like we submit the form. So grab content from the things, do something with them, and clear them out when we're done. Make it look like we're submitting the form, but we actually ain't. Beautiful test data here, if I do say so myself, but check it out. Wait a minute, Luke. Title, content, that looks just like the request bodies we had prepared for our post request. It's like I did this on purpose. Yes, even to this day, after doing all these projects all these years, I still do small dumb steps like this because it's the best way to learn and to make sure that you're laying the foundation before you're trying to build the house on wet concrete. This log right here tells me I have the form wired up and ready to actually start doing some logic with, because the UI UX part is kind of handled for me already. Well, that's what I'm talking about. So instead of just console logging, how about the miracle of jQuery Ajax to the rescue. Let's make a post request that mimics that post tab. What I'm going to do is say the type here is a post request. The URL is still API/post. I didn't have any additional keywords there. And I have a property called, not body, data in jQuery Ajax. It's called body and fetch, which is why I got confused. And we're going to tell it to simply take this object right here and just make it the data. And if you're wondering, but Luke, what kind of data is it going to do? Because on the server side, we had two body parsers, sick band name, of URL encoded and JSON, and you even demoed both of those here with this Postman test of the body property and the URL encoded and the raw JSON options for the two different types of interpreters we can have. Well, we did JSON in Postman, but if we don't specify any other information, then Ajax will default to that data type of URL encoded, and we have that body parser available on our servers. So if you recall, when I did a post request and I successfully posted something, it sent this as a response. A JSON object with a message or MSG property for new to-do added. If I wanted some fun stuff on the front end, I can simply say when that request receives a response. Remember, it's asynchronous, so we have to promisify it. When we make the request, we get a response, and then we capture it and do something with it. So I could just say response and console log the response. That way I know something went right, which is pretty cool, right? And we want to know something went correctly there. So at a minimum, let's check this out. We're going to do test add, title, test, add content. Add, what am I doing? Who cares? Add to do item. So we're going to click the button. Oh boy, all right. 404 not found. Classic. All right, so I have a typo somewhere, somehow. Why did I call it posts? It's to-dos. So again, I don't like editing out even dumb errors that I do. It's not because I'm trying to make it seem like I'm some coding genius. I'm not. I'm just a stubborn workhorse. But the more you code, the faster you get at debugging errors, not that you make less of them. So I don't know why I caught that. So if y'all have been watching them and yelling at me the whole time, Lord knows, maybe some of y'all DMing me right now when you see this. There we go. That should be what it is, right? No, actually double check now. Okay, let's try that again. Second time's a charm. All right, I got my server response, but nothing happened on the page here. That's because we haven't written any kind of code to re-get that request list. I could choose to do a couple different things. I could choose to take this object and, along with console logging my server response, simply do the same thing here. Run one of these appends that takes the to-do items and appends them to the list on the screen that I'm seeing. That may fall out of sync, though. If I happen to spam this add to-do item button really fast, I might be adding a bunch of blank to-dos here, but my server might not be keeping up on the back end, which would be unfortunate. But watch what happens. What would happen if I refresh? New and fresh index HTML, app.js runs again, gets the new list, and adds that new to-do item at the bottom of the page. So if I want to have that happen without having to refresh the page, watch this. I'm going to make some kind of utility function. We're going to call it get and display to-dos. Its sole purpose is to take all this code we had written originally, the get request. I'm going to cut it, paste it, format it. Okay. And then up here, I'm going to say when the page loads, let's go ahead and just get them. Get and display to do. So wire at the button to be prepared for a click. And after that wire up happens, get and display. Okay, cool. So refresh, everything should be the same. But now that I have that function available in the global scope of my document, in tandem with console logging the response, you guessed it, I can come over here, console log the response just so I know it's all nice and pretty in the console window. I can also just say get and display the new list of to-do items. Hooray! That's all I gotta do. How sick is that? Now, this does have one issue. Remember, I simply append everything to the DOM. So before I run through the loop, I probably want to empty what's currently there. Otherwise, I'm going to start doubling up all of my to-do items. Because append doesn't mean replace what's there, it means just add to what's already there. So let's demonstrate the double up here as an example. Double up, this is the problem. Did I even refresh? Let's refresh. Double up. This is still a problem. Add to-do item. And there's what I mean. There's the original appendings of the 3 to-do items. And then here are the original 3 and the new one I added to the list. So before I append everything over again, I'm simply going to ask, I can't say empty the whole body. So I'll have to ask jQuery to empty out those particular items or remove them from the DOM, which right now they have no unique way of being gotten. So let me change it up a little bit. Underneath this form, I'm going to produce a div with a class name of container, just so I have all of those to-do items in a container I can empty out easily. So instead of appending them to the document body, I'll append them to the ID container, and that way I can say, yo, jQuery, find that container, and empty it out of its current contents before appending new contents into it. And notice I do that above the for loop. I've had students wonder why their contents are constantly empty. It's because they keep emptying it inside of the for loop. Okay, well, let's try that again. If you see our refresh, it's back in sync now. So we're going to say double up, fix the problem. And there you go. It adds it. It asks our server to come back in sync with our information, and voila, we have a pretty cool little to-do list app building out with the jQuery Ajax functions. That's what I'm talking about, y'all. That's what I'm talking about. Deleting them ain't so bad either. We could make like a little X button that will delete them or something like that. Like down here when I'm appending these cards to the container, I could give this thing a class name to select it by that might be something like to do item or something like that. Doesn't really matter what we do right here, you know. Here's some cool tricks we can actually do. If I want to append something to this particular like parent div like that, what I need to do is kind of reverse the logic I have here for hashtag container. Like I could store it in a variable and append it to the container. I can reverse it too. So I'm actually going to do that. I'm actually going to choose to take this code and say create this div, and rather than saying append that code to the container, I'm going to say append to container. Nope. container. And that should work the same way. I'm pretty sure. Let's find out if that's the case or not. Yeah, it does. Okay, so the reason I did that is because now anything I chain on the end here, if I need to like chain anything on or add something to the div right there, it'll be as easy as simply saying, you know, like append. And that append isn't going to reference the container. It's going to reference this thing to the furthest to the left, which is this div right here. So if I say append a button that says test, let's see where that button ends up appending to. As you can see, the test button got appended to each of my to-do items and not to the container one time. So remember, when you chain these jQuery functions, they reference the thing that's furthest to the left. In this case, that's why I reversed it. The thing furthest to the left is my div and the subsequent children elements inside there. So let's add this button into that div on each of these elements. Let's go make sure that's the case here. There's the root div, the form, the container div, and yeah. Awesome. It's getting added as a sibling next to the paragraph element. I like that. So now that I have that, I could also choose to make that into a variable that has some logic added to it or something like that. I mean, there's tons of options we could do here. I just want to show you all some different things you can do with jQuery, as a lot of the times, you know, people will blast through the jQuery section writing code a certain way and never take other things into consideration, for example. So what I could choose instead now is simply store that into some kind of variable or make a variable that represents the button that I kind of wire up and then I do something with. So I could choose to do the following. We're going to call it the delete button, so you already know what it's going to be doing. Be like, yo, jQuery, please make a button that's going to be saying delete this item, that when clicked upon, sorry, I'll go ahead to format here in a second. When that button is clicked, run the following code. Test. There we go. And that way I can append my delete button to the container like that. That way I have kind of like some variables for different purposes and things here. So, whoop. All right, test. Now, how does that unique test help us, if at all? Let's see if this helps. I want to console log which ID we're trying to delete, if any at all. Check that out. Because of closures, we have each ID, thankfully, remembered in the scope of this delete button function. It knows which one in particular we're clicking on. Why do we care so much about that? Because when we delete an individual to-do item, we want to delete it by its ID. So let's give that a shot. Instead of console logging the ID, I'm going to be like, yo, jQuery, fire off your Ajax function with a type of delete, a URL path of the following template literal, /API /to-dos, no mistake this time, and interpolate in the ID property to this request. This doesn't require a request body, so there's no data property. Then, whatever the response is from the server, capture it for me if you don't mind. Console log it so I'm nice and happy in my client-side console log, and then go ahead and call that get and display function again so we can display the new list of chirps after we successfully delete one from the server and ask our server to get us back in sync with what's happening on the back end. Let's go delete some of these dumb ones down here, and voila. We have a delete function that's keeping us in sync and persisted by the server. How cool is that? Now, the edit one I may actually break into another video because our lab asked you to incorporate a Bootstrap Modal in order to do so. And that modal will take probably the length of this video and some more because of having to go over what has to occur. But let's just, for the sake of theory crafting, if you will, talk about that. What would have to happen with some pseudo code? Well, would probably make an edit button that would look, well, a lot like this dude or dudette right up here. So let's go ahead and copy and paste that right here. Edit item, yeah? And here's the kind of complicated workflow. When we click the edit button, it doesn't fire the edit request right away because we haven't actually edited anything yet. So pseudocode-wise, here's what would happen. First, we would want to launch the modal. So the modal would have to pop. So you have to see how Bootstrap handles that. When the modal pops up, it'll have two inputs in it. One for the title and a text area for our other content. It would have our current values filled into it. So the modal would pop up with another form that has the data inside of it. the modal would have two buttons on it, one to close the modal if that was an accident, and one to save the changes. So the close button, I think that makes sense. It means make the modal go away. But when they click the save change button, they would do, you guessed it, save the changes with an Ajax request to our server that would look like the following. The type would be a put request. The URL would be /API / did it again, todos / and we can interpolate in the ID again if I wanted to, like that. That way we have that URL ready to go. This one does need a data property, so I'll go ahead and capture it like that. So it'd probably look very, very similar to our post request, wherever I hid that thing up here, with this title and content object. So it'd probably be very similar code-wise to what I had up there, title and content. But remember, these variables we would have to grab when they click the Save Changes button, which is what this Ajax code represents. So we'd also need to grab something I'd call like the edited title and edited content. So we might have the modal might be built with two completely different form elements in there that we call the edit title and edit content ID, so we can grab their values. Make that Ajax request to edit this particular path for the ID of this to-do item with this request body that matches up the same syntax we have over here, title and content. And then the same process from there, just capture the server response. Like so, like we've been doing, and then get and display to-dos, and then whatever we need to do to close the modal, right? We have to close the modal still after all this is said and done. That way, the logic there is built out for us, right? So not bad. I mean, it seems like a lot of pseudo code, but when you actually write it out using the Bootstrap modal, it's not too bad. The Bootstrap modal is one way to go about it. I actually prefer to tell people to go down this rabbit hole of what's called a suite alert modal, only because they have examples of a modal that does this kind of workflow anyway. If you go look at some of their examples, there's one that asks you to type in your GitHub name. Yeah, try me. And it goes and makes an Ajax request and says, okay, you're good to go. And it found my picture off of GitHub. So it actually has an example. It's written with fetch, so you could probably take it and try and make it work instead with a Jquery Ajax with that pseudo code. But nevertheless, they have an example of what that modal would look like in order to run an edit request. So here it'd be like, edit the title of your chirp and the content of your chirp. Either click away to cancel or click the cancel button. Remember, you'd have two inputs here with unique IDs. Then you would have... Or actually, you wouldn't even need the IDs if you use Suite Alert. It'd be even easier than that. Fill those values out, save changes. It would make that Ajax request to our server to edit the values, and then simply close the modal and re-get the chirps list, and voila, you're good to go. I think that's personally easier than the Bootstrap modal, since this is already pre-built for us and has an example that makes it easy. So check out the Suite Alert library. If you want to use it, all you have to do is grab this, I believe it's either this one or maybe from their CDN up here. Yeah, click on that CDN link, and what you're probably going to want to do is copy the URL from their clipboard here on the Suite Alert JS deliver site. I did that by simply clicking on this link for JS CDN deliver, right? And you want to simply apply it in the head of your HTML. Oh, I copied the URL. I didn't copy the script tag for it. Is there a way to copy the script tag, or do I have to write it myself? I have to write it myself. Go figure. That's all right. Nope, not everything, just that line. There we go. And I should have that Suite Alert script ready to go, and your style sheet below it means you can customize the style on it if you need to. Let's make sure it doesn't throw any massive errors when I refresh. I don't see any errors popping up about not finding it, and we can test it real quick by simply saying swal.fire test. That way when the page loads, it fires a test modal example. Refresh, and there you go. Every time I refresh now, that test modal will fire. And that's it. Fire the modal when they click on the edit button, fill out the form in the modal, and then if they click save in the modal, it needs to run an Ajax request that looks like that pretty much. So now I'm going to leave y'all with that, and hopefully seeing how I kind of went through each tab in Postman and attempted to recreate an example of it using Ajax functions on the front end kind of shows y'all the relationship between a website and the server that we had built. So good luck, happy hunting, happy hacking. If you need more information, I'm always happy to make more videos. If you want a follow-up video of finishing the modal, and another follow-up video after that of actually styling it up a little bit and maybe adding some features, if there's interest in that, let me know. But honestly, you won't be using Ajax in the rest of the course. I think it's important to know where modern network requests came from, and Ajax was one of the progenitors of this stuff. Like, for example, when you're going to be building this lab again with TypeScript with a React front end, where you won't be using Ajax. You'll only be using fetch requests. So keep that in mind. You're not going to be using jQuery.ajax with React. You're going to be using fetch requests, but it's going to be doing the same things with just, well, different properties. Instead of type, it's called method. The URL is just the first argument in the fetch function. And instead of data, it's called body. But unlike Ajax, fetch is unopinionated. It won't default to URL encoded or anything like that. It won't simply take the response if it's JSON and parse it into JavaScript for us. We have to tell it to parse the body response or the response into JavaScript if we need it. In this case, jQuery Ajax was opinionated to do that for me. So when you go to fetch, it's a bit more raw than Ajax. Less opinionated, more code to write, but nevertheless, you learn more. So yeah, hope you all enjoyed this, and whatever else you're looking for, let me know. I have a couch I gotta go put together.